Now, that drama was playing out just as President Trump welcomed the German Chancellor Friedrich Merz to Washington. The two leaders held a cordial chat in the Oval Office, trading compliments in front of reporters. But serious issues like the war in Ukraine and Trump's tariffs loomed large.
As Donald Trump prepared to welcome Friedrich Merz to the White House, many wondered how the German leader would navigate the US president's now notorious fireside chats. But the pair seemed to strike a friendly tone from their first handshake.
President Trump, sir, your message to the people of Germany.
And their Oval Office meeting quickly proved cordial rather than combative, with Merz gifting Trump a copy of his German-born grandfather's birth certificate and Trump sharing mixed praise.
First of all, I'm glad to meet because I've been dealing with the Chancellor, and he's a very good man to deal with. He's difficult, I would say. Can I say that? It's a positive.
Go ahead.
You wouldn't want me to say you're easy, right?
No.
Yeah, he's a very great representative of Germany. I guess you could say.
The meeting played out in front of watching press, with Trump dominating much of the conversation. Merz mostly watched from the sidelines, but focused on Ukraine during the few times he spoke.
We both agree on this war and how terrible this war is going on, and we are both looking for ways to stop it very soon. And I told the President before we came in that he is the key person in the world who can really do that now by putting pressure on Russia.
Trump was reluctant to single Russia out as the aggressor in the war, offering this analogy.
But sometimes you see two young children fighting like crazy. They hate each other and they're fighting in a park. And you try and pull them apart. They don't want to be pulled. Sometimes you're better off letting them fight for a while and then pulling them apart. And I gave that analogy to Putin yesterday.
It's not a view Merz is likely to share, but he refrained from any public disagreements. The pair no doubt had plenty to chew over at a brief working lunch after their Oval Office discussion. Merz later declared he was, quote, extremely satisfied with the meeting. A German meetup could be on the cards next, with Trump accepting Merz's invite to visit. A date has yet to be decided on.
Well, DW's chief political editor, Michaela Küfner, travelled with the German Chancellor to Washington. She's just gotten back and joins me here at the studio. Good to see you, Michaela. What is your biggest takeaway from this trip?
Look, this was a success. So much could have gone wrong. As the accompanying press on the way there, we were all debating what could possibly go wrong. He wasn't even challenged on the status of the far-right AfD party here in Germany, which in parts is seen as extreme right. And that's where J.D. Vance, the US vice president, who was also in the room, in the past has attacked Germany. And we saw comments like, drop the firewall, that it's not really democratic, that Germany's heading towards a tyranny. So everybody was almost amazed that nothing went off the rails, which in itself was a success. And then he did manage to score a few points on Ukraine, but also on trade. So I did get to ask him what his takeaway was. Let's just take a listen.
Yeah.
This is my takeaway from today. He is really willing to have an agreement on trade. And if we could achieve that within a foreseeable period of time, we would have achieved much more than former governments on both sides of the Atlantic did. So this is a real great opportunity.
Michaela, watching Friedrich Merz and Donald Trump in the Oval Office, they seem to have a bit of a good rapport, a bit of a chemistry. I wondered if you noticed that, and if that somehow translate into a new era of the relationship between Germany and the United States.
I think era is a very big word. We don't really have a concrete outcome. Are the tariffs going to get dropped? No. Was there some, at least, verbal commitment to try and seek an agreement? And Donald Trump himself was on the record saying he believes there would be an agreement, otherwise there would be tariffs, but there could be an agreement. So that in itself, in Trump world, is progress. That is a willingness to sit down and work things out. Also, they debated or spoke at length about Ukraine. Friedrich Merz did manage to engage Donald Trump on the fact that it is Russia striking civilian targets as well, and Ukraine being very limited to military targets. So there's a distinction now in this conversation that was publicly held. We also learned that it became a lot more detailed, of course, over lunch. Also, those historic references. Friedrich Merz was very grateful. He said thank you many times. And at the same time, then had the message packed within that, that once again, it was down to the United States to be able to stop a war. So clearly, they speak the same language because Merz also comes from a business background. Are they on the same page? No, but at least they can talk about it. And Friedrich Merz did walk out of there with the feeling that whenever Trump wants to call Europe, that he will probably be the one who gets that call first.
Yeah, interesting. But, I mean, we've just spent the first part of this programme talking about this feud that's now broken out between the US president and Elon Musk. This was essentially, that relationship was imploding as this meeting was happening. You had Elon Musk tweeting furiously about, did this somehow overshadow Merz's visit? Did it take away from that as this was happening?
Well, there was no expectation on the German side, within the German team, that they would be the absolute centre of attention in Washington. The United States is traditionally, one can say, very much engaged with its own politics, internal politics, more so than many other countries. So I didn't get the sense that there was a feeling that there should have been more attention on that, but it also illustrated so much to all of us that what is keeping European leaders up at night, which is the trade issue and particularly Ukraine, is not keeping Donald Trump up at night. It's his dealings with his own Congress. He's now starting to see movements across the aisle who want to help out Ukraine. He made very clear that it will always have to come down to his own decision. And there's criticism of Donald Trump, and there's this very, very public fallout with Elon Musk. And that's where he now has to do some public disaster management of his own. Yeah. So it's only part of what he thinks about all day. And the German side, the Europeans, don't really have many illusions on that. But now they have a better way of communicating. And only Donald Trump's next actions really tell us how much of a success that meeting really was.
All right, Michaela, as always, thanks very much for that. That's our chief political editor, Michaela Küfner, just back from Washington. Thanks for that, Michaela. Let's get more on this from our chief political correspondent, Nina Haase. Hi, Nina. What did Merz get out of his meeting with Trump?
Well, here in Germany, the Chancellor is getting a lot of applause for how he handled the meeting, from all sides, by the way, even from the opposition Green Party. And you do have to keep in mind that Merz had been bracing for a bust-up. And it was obvious that his team had clearly watched all the videos from other Oval Office scenes, especially the shouting match with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. You'd had Vice President J.D. Vance's speech in Munich earlier this year attacking Berlin's democratic standards, and Marco Rubio's recent comments that Germany was acting like a tyranny. So there was none of that, and Merz came out of the meeting unscathed, and that in itself is considered a huge success here. So Merz did not do a lot of the talking. We did a rough calculation, and Trump spoke for roughly 90% of the time, Merz roughly 10%. But when Merz did talk, he managed to place a few of the messages that he thought were important. Trump talked about Ukraine and Russia like two kids fighting on the playground. We just saw that again. And Merz then said later that it's Russia that attacks civilian targets and that Ukraine doesn't do that and only attacks military targets. So slight nuances that Merz tried to get into the conversation here. His goal is obviously to keep Trump interested and engaged in European security. It was their first encounter, and what's clear now is that from now on, Trump may in fact call Friedrich Merz if ever he wants to speak to the Europeans. And of course, it's unsatisfying for Germany, the world's third largest economy, to see so clearly that this was not a meeting of two equals. But Merz did accept that subservient role to build up a working relationship with the US president.
And Nina, the German Chancellor was there just as Trump's relationship with Elon Musk was imploding. How did that impact the meeting?
Many analysts are now in agreement. They say it was a stroke of luck for Friedrich Merz to achieve exactly that, to not essentially fall into any traps that would have been placed potentially by the people in the Oval Office. And the focus of DC journalists from US broadcasters was very much on domestic issues. And you have to keep in mind that a major point of contention between the US and Germany had been the Trump administration's support for the German far-right AfD party. And that didn't come up in front of the media this time around. And also J.D. Vance remained silent, and it just seemed to all the observers that they had other issues on their minds.
All right, that's DW's Nina Haase. Thank you.